First of all, I want to thank the organizers, not just as a courtesy phrase, but I do believe that it is still politically a great achievement for us to have here in Belgrade, and I'm proud of it as a Belgrader, a panel in which the overwhelming majority of the panelists are in favor actually of a solution which is not what is our official vision of the way things are in Kosovo at the moment, and I think it is good that we have an open debate on this issue. The second thing that I would like to say is that I do believe that it is time to cut the Gordian knot, but to cut the Gordian knot by finding a compromise solution, a solution that would satisfy at least some of the wishes of both the Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo and Metohija. And for this purpose, we should do at least a couple of things. One of the things that we need to do is to refrain ourselves from all sorts of unilateral actions. As we speak here today in this hall, the parliament in Prištine is having a vote on the transformation of the so-called Kosovo Security Force into the so-called quote-unquote army of the quote-unquote Republic of Kosovo. After so many years of war, after so many years of conflict, without a political solution, even maybe on the horizon, someone is yet again making a unilateral step, trying to change the reality on the ground by doing an action that leads us to further militarization. This type of activity can lead us only into further escalations. This means that unilateral actions need to stop. I remember clearly when in 2012 we initiated the high-level dialogue. One of the first understandings that we had with our Kosovo-Albanian colleagues was to try and settle the disputes around the negotiating table, not to do it under the table, behind the scenes, or without each other. What is happening now is not in the spirit or in line of what we envisaged 6 years ago. However, I must also say that I do not agree that actually there is one important thing that I agree with. I first want to say with what Ilir said. No one here wants division along ethnic lines. Serbia is today a multi-ethnic society. But to be quite honest with each other, what happened in 2008 was exactly division on ethnic basis and along ethnic lines. Because when unilateral declaration of independence was done in 2008, it was done based on aspirations of majority Albanian people in Kosovo and Metohija, and in a territory in which, unfortunately, after the wars and all of the ethnic cleansing, more than 90% of the population were ethnic Albanians. In that sense, I want to say that any kind of solution, if we achieve it, will definitely not mean that Belgrade and Pristina will remain without Serbs or Albanians respectively. And no such solution is something that we are aiming for. We are aiming for a solution that would create a new paradigm in relation between Serbs and Albanians. It is often underestimated how much of our politics here in the Balkans is about psychology and emotions, and I'm trying to speak these days a bit more about it. We need to put each other into one another's shoes more often and to try to understand each other. If we reach an agreement on two core issues that are unresolved, this is the question of status and the question of territory. And if we Serbs and Albanians manage to shake hands on these two issues, I do believe that the overall relation between not just Belgrade and Pristina, but Serb and Albanian people in the Balkans would change for better. And it would set another important precedent in our region. And that is that important disputes are being settled not through conflict, but through peaceful means, through dialogue and through agreement between the parties. And we will continue working in this direction no matter what the difficulties might be ahead. For Serbia, achieving lasting peace and stability is crucial. We've got everything else more or less figured out about our future. We know what we want now as a nation after 30 years of terrible trauma. And never please underestimate those of you who maybe don't have the opportunity to follow the situation here on a daily basis. Please never underestimate the trauma that all of us together went through as a region in the past 3 decades. So some things certainly definitely need time. We had here at the forum the opportunity to listen to the representatives of Austria, representatives of other countries who had historic experiences of their own with ethnic issues, and definitely to heal some wounds, it will take time, determination, and effort. And it will always be unpopular, always be unpopular.
Let me ask you something before I turn to Agon and ask him what Prištine is offering. You said something, I think, very important. So following a deal, there'll be a new era, as I understand, in relations between Serbs and Albanians. What will be different?
If you know the Serbs and Albanians well, we are very passionate about politics, we are very passionate about history, we are very proud, we are very passionate when it comes to friendships. This means that we are good friends, but we are also terrible adversaries when we fight. And in that sense, if we manage to shake hands on a deal that would leave both parties equally satisfied or leaving with something achievable and presentable to our nations, I believe that the doors of the future, in a sense, would open. But unfortunately, I don't want to spread, optimism which is not based on what's happening on the ground, on reality. There are still too many centripetal forces, so to say. There are still too many factors that are bringing us further away from a solution than there are circumstances that are bringing us closer together. But
what will be different? What will be different from today? You reach an agreement, you sign it, it's approved, everybody likes it. What will be different on the daily basis? What will be the difference?
I don't even dare to entirely dream about everything that we can achieve, because the realities of today are still too dire. But if you ask Ilir, or if you ask any of our other colleagues from any part of this region, one of the first things you will hear is how frustrated we get when we have to, stop at these checkpoints every 40, 50, or 100 kilometers. And it has nothing to do with our national pride, our national dignity, our, national interest. It has all to do it has everything to do with politics and lack of understanding. Our side, President Vučić has proposed already 2 years ago a very bold initiative to ease the circulation of people, goods, and everything in our region. So far, some have supported this, but still political obstacles prevail in realization of this type of ideas. And though there are people who are working to create a better climate for relations, there are still many more who like to exploit the unresolved conflict for purposes of their own. Some of them are exploiting it for domestic political purposes, and of course, there are many those beyond our region who are, seeing our region as an opportunity to show off their political strength or political interests. And we need to be aware of this. Serbs and Albanians, we don't need to be anybody's chessboard, no matter where they come from.
Okay. Agon, what is Prištine offering to its people?
Okay, since I'm the only...
And what do you tell these people who are so passionately against this?
First of all, I think that we all need to be very realistic about the situation. And I think that we, while looking for a solution, must keep looking at ourselves in the mirror. And when I say this, I mean that we need to realistically assess our situation. I've heard here, the argument of my esteemed colleague. One of the things he said, if I understood correctly, is that the so-called independence of Kosovo is a given, that it is irreversible. I don't believe that this is the case. I do believe that the situation is such that Kosovo is not independent. It is not a member of the United Nations. It is not a member of OSCE. It is not a member of all major international organizations. It is not independent when it comes to providing security on its territory, because it has huge international presence in terms of security missions from both NATO and the European Union. Financially, economically, it is very much dependent on funding from international community and from also exchange with other countries as well. We can now enter into almost philosophical debate whether there are, and to what extent are generally territories and countries in today's modern world independent and sovereign. But certainly membership in international organizations and full security territory of security control of a territory qualifies as part of the core definition of a state. And I'm not sure that in this case this definition has been fulfilled by any means. On the other hand, as well, a part of our society likes at least equally to dream and to live in a world in which everything on the ground is just as it is defined in some of our legal acts, and in our political programs. The reality, in my view, is that we need to achieve a compromise, a solution that will resolve, that will tackle exactly the core issues that we have dispute on. No one will bring to Priština on a silver plate what they expect to achieve or receive when it comes to materializing their dreams about membership in international organizations or reaffirming their position in the international community without a compromise with Belgrade. Equally, no one will, with the magic wand, fulfill, our view of our vision of how the resolution 1244 should have been implemented, or how our constitution should be implemented on the entire territory of our state. It is clear that we require a compromise, and what has been done in 2008, I do not believe that it was a solution. It happened not during the era of the Milosevic regime. It did not happen during the conflict time. It happened 8 years after the end of the war. And there is no comparative example in modern European history that 8 years after a conflict was ended, people came and asked from a party to that war for substantial territorial concessions. There is no matching example in modern European history that a nation willingly accepted so. So I ask of you all to also understand the Serbian position. 30 years ago, I already mentioned this period. 30 years ago, and I mentioned this to some of my interlocutors earlier today, we were a country of 252,000 square kilometers. Now we are a nation of nearly 88,000 square kilometers, according to some even 78,000 square kilometers. It is a huge, huge historic trauma for the Serbian people. Just as equally I acknowledge it is for other nations who lived in the area of former ex-Yugoslavia. This is why we need to act very carefully and to only reach solutions through agreement. And if it is something that includes resolving the question of territoriality and addressing the question of territoriality, we should not run away from it. Because if we manage to set a positive precedent and achieve a deal in a peaceful way, we would have resolved what is the major concern of the Albanians, and that is, you know, the thing that they want to achieve, what they want to aspire, and we would have achieved at least part of our goals and left this deal with, you know, at least dignity and part of our interests protected.
Let me ask you something about the UN before I go to Ilir. I'm a little bit confused. A year ago, Minister Dacic said that he does not exclude a UN seat for Kosovo. This year, he says it's out of question. Can a UN seat be on the table or not?
I can only repeat what I just said. No one in Serbia is prepared to give the interim institutions of self-government in Pristina on a silver plate as a present anything. We don't expect any presents for ourselves. We expect a fair deal, a deal in which both sides will achieve something for their people and for their long-term interests.
Ilir, is the problem borders or what happens inside of those borders? Why would Kosovo, the Kosovo Serbs happier now, or let's say if such a deal goes, are they going to be happier after?
You know, these panels are becoming somehow predictable. I'm very sorry to say this, but they are. Because the question was to the Serbian leadership government is asking is something they feel it would satisfy Serbia, but it would destabilize the entire region, and we can't do that anymore.
Marco, take 2 minutes and then we'll go around. Please, 2 minutes.
Very briefly, I respect Mr. Ilir very much, but I do not believe that it would help if I would say only what some people in Prištine would like to hear. I do believe it is much important that we tell each other how we feel about the situation and how we view the situation, rather than to try to, in words, appease each other. For the past 7 years in Brussels, we've been trying to keep peace, and we've been, with all of the setbacks, successful in doing so, and I don't believe that this should be underestimated. The very fact that stability has, with all of the setbacks and all of the difficulties being kept, has done a good service for both the Albanian and Serbian people in this region, and has at least kept the open perspective to sometime in the future find a solution. And believe me, it was not pleasant to, for more than 250 times, go there and talk about various issues in which we have directly opposing or conflicting views and interests. But we knew why we were doing it. We were doing it for the sake of the future of our country, of our people, of our region, which we view as something that deserves to be set up in a way that would not leave hundreds of thousands of young people leaving the area every year.
Thank you. Sabine, I want to turn a little bit to a different subject. There is a perception that there is a disagreement. Convince them.
The question here is, I'm not in the business of convincing. The question here is not whether we want to win an argument, but whether if we want to solve a problem. And these things are sometimes quite different. If we want to make a heated debate about arguments and values and, you know, how to, in words, come up as a winner in such a debate, it is one set of issues and arguments you use. But my question would be then, if the question of territory is not one of the core problems here, just like the question of status is one of the core unresolved issues. If these are not the core unresolved issues, why did then in 2008 such a huge part of the international community stand exactly behind the idea of changing the borders and taking a certain part of territory from Serbia? If it's not about territory, if it is today in 2018 not about territory, then probably the decision from 2008 also has been changed, because in 2008 it was all about territory. It was all about our territory. And by the way, in 2008, it was just 10 years ago. We were a member of the United Nations recognized in our borders that included Kosovo and Metohija, and we were not an undemocratic government or undemocratic regime. It was almost 10 years after the end of the conflict. We were members of the Council of Europe, members of the OSCE, and had actually pro-Western democratic governments in power in a series of election cycles here. In the moment it was decided in Prištine with support of some to take part of our territory. And it was all about ethnic question and all about territorial issues. After the end of certain other great conflicts that we had in European history in the 20th century, once the democratic issue was resolved, no one came to the countries that had such issues and asked them for additional territorial concessions. And I believe that this is also an important point. So the ground of values is a very slippery slope in this debate. Our ambition is to be fully concentrated on what is possible as a solution. I heard here, and I took well note of the argument that, for example, Kosovo Albanians don't want pieces of territory chopped off. Sorry, neither do the Serbs. What you see not fit for you, we don't see fit for us as well. But this means that we need to look for a solution, look for a compromise that will leave us both with achieving something, getting something in a civilized, peaceful way, not through a dispute. Otherwise, if anyone in Kosovo or in the international community expects that we would, on a silver plate, I repeat again, deliver the recognition of separation of 10,887 square kilometers of our sovereign territory and not to even achieve any kind of compromise for the Serbs, for Serbia, for the Serbs who live in Kosovo and Metohija, this is not realistic politics, and there is no one in the international community or in the world who can implement this to work. And this leaves us in an unresolved situation that then others with interests that are not equal as ours, which is to keep peace and stability, can exploit easily whenever they want.
Thank you. I want you, Marko.
I agree. This is one of the points we obviously agree on. We do miss Oliver Ivanović, and he was one of the voices of the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. We also do not forget the fact that he was for more than 3 years imprisoned by the authorities there with the participation of ULEX on baseless charges that were, in our view, politically motivated. We do not forget this. He was fighting for his ideas. He sacrificed everything that a man can sacrifice for these ideas, and he will be remembered. This is one point. Regarding the European integrations of Serbia, Serbia has, in the context of the Brussels Agreement, been monitored through Chapter 35. And long have gone the days when there were remarks, objections, or pressures because Serbia maybe did not, up to the last level, implement every aspect it was due to implement of these agreements. Serbia has fully lived up to its commitments stemming from the first Brussels Agreement, and the only major remaining unimplemented issue from the first Brussels Agreement is the Community of Serb Municipalities. Last week we marked 2,000 days since the Community of Serb Municipalities was agreed but was not implemented or delivered by the authorities in Prištine, and this has been merely mentioned at our panel. I do believe that this is an important aspect still left to be implemented of the first agreement, and the fact that majority of the people in the public sphere here or there does not approve does not mean that the officials who undertook the commitment don't need to work on it. I do believe that in every major conversation we have with EU officials or some member state officials, the topic of Kosovo often comes up. And it would be really bad if for a prolonged period of time this topic would overshadow other aspects of our European integrations, which are extremely important, which are about the reforms of our institutions, about rule of law, about improving various standards of our society that bring benefit to the citizens. We want to create a better society for ourselves. We believe we need Europe, but we also believe Europe needs us.
Thank you, Agon. Very educated forecast. So, very quickly, what is your prediction for the state of affairs in 2019? And it's a weather forecast.
I'm probably not the best futurologist, but my guess would be that in 2019 we would have a new Europe, basically. We would have new balance of power in Brussels in many aspects. I cannot predict in what direction this will go. No one probably can. But this means that we have a relatively narrow, so to say, window of opportunity to use the time until mid next year to work with the European Commission and with the people in Brussels to try and resume what we can and to implement what we can from the dialogue and to resume the talks on a more comprehensive solution. So my best guess would be that we would still have peace, we would still have some time to go until we reach some major agreement, but we would have at least narrowed the gap a bit. This may not be satisfactory, no revolutionary breakthrough, but
It's still not raining with dogs and cats.
yes.
So, not heavy.